Welcome to the second talk of the day of Designival. So I first came across our next speaker in 2002 when he was involved in an exhibition called Craft and Technology at the Liverpool School of Art, which was then on Hope Street and has obviously now moved across the other end of Hope Street. I immediately fell in love with his simple black and white and comical illustration of characters. He's a self-proclaimed shit-hot runner with a personal best at 10k of 32 minutes and 20 seconds and the 25th fastest time in the UK for his age. Please welcome on stage James Jarvis.
Thanks very much. I'm actually an ex-runner now because I've got no cartilage in my left knee, but you know, it sounds good. This image is actually it's an homage to Tomi Ungara, a poster that I was obsessed with as a kid called Black Power, White Power. But I just put it in the beginning because I didn't know where else to put it. It has no relevance to the flow of my talk. I was starting to prepare for my talk yesterday and I got completely sidetracked looking at a website that scans in old Lego catalogues. And you can look up the instructions for Lego toys from like 1975. I put this image in because I think Lego was the first thing I was really obsessed with, Lego and Tintin. And I think Lego has a real relevance to me now because I think it represents this urge I have to kind of construct realities, and obviously Lego, especially then when it wasn't a kind of licensed rubbish that it is now, it was all about this kind of creating your own reality through these geometric blocks. It all got ruined when they brought out hinges in 1981. Until then you had to rely on ingenuity. But I'm just going to go through a very quick flow of stuff that inspired me when I was young, because I think those images that you look at when you're young often stay relevant for a long time, and I think there's certain things I was exposed to as a child which have kind of informed everything I've done ever since. This is Richard Scarry, another artist who draws very comprehensive realities. Alfred Bestall. These are basically books that I was obsessed with as a kid. John Lord, who I was lucky enough to be taught by at Brighton. I studied illustration at Brighton. It was actually Brighton Poly when I went there, and Brighton University when I left. And I'm kind of snobbish enough that I look down on art schools as part of universities. Proper art schools should be part of polys, because it just seems more hardcore. But anyway, Raymond Briggs, who just left Brighton when I went there. And some books that my mum had. My parents, my mum studied as a painter with Richard Hamilton and taught art history, and my dad's a professor of psychology, so I guess that's kind of relevant because I think I have a kind of vaguely scientific bent to how I try and approach image making, and I'm lucky enough to have a very cultured mother who introduced me to all kinds of amazing imagery. That's the Tomi Ungara poster that I ripped off. I was obsessed with this book when I was about 7 or 8. It's a poster exhibition. And also this book about very serious conceptual and minimalist artists from the 60s. And I really like the idea of art being made with a kind of a kind of constructivist bent, that you think about the process and it's not just inspiration, that you can approach it quite methodically. When I was about 10, I discovered 2000 AD, which was a kind of iconic sci-fi comic. This is my favourite artist, Mike McMahon. And then in my kind of mid-teens, I discovered Raw magazine, which was a kind of underground comics anthology from New York, edited by Art Spiegelman, and I got obsessed with Gary Panter. So we can sort of see my journey from Richard Scarry to Tintin and Asterix to sort of more sophisticated and progressive kind of versions of cartoon imagery. And this is the last influential book that I had, which I actually bought as a student in Brighton. and it's by a really incredibly brilliant comic artist and illustrator called, he kind of draws under the name Terry Johnson. He's a Japanese artist, and he's a founder of a kind of movement of bad drawing. And we all bought this book from a remaindered bookshop in Brighton in about 1991, because bad drawing was really in then. I think it's quite in again now. But the sort of directness and unmoderatedness, is that a word, of his imagery has really stayed with me. I also grew up loving painters. This is Jean Dubuffet, Claes Oldenburg, and I'm going to show some really early work as well. And I think what I'm trying to do is kind of show the little journey I've gone through, because I can see, I'm 42 now, and I can see in the sort of 20 years that I've been working that I've gone quite a kind of, I've followed a real journey, and I haven't just found one language and stuck with it. I'm always moving forward and always re-examining how I go about making my work and what my work is. These were drawings I made as a student at Brighton. I really wanted to go to the Royal College to do a postgraduate course, and I was told that they already had a cartoonist at the Royal College, so I should do something else to impress them. So I went out and did airbrush drawings of car parks, partly because I was really into skateboarding, and I wasn't very good at it, but I loved the way skateboarding reinterprets the urban environment for something completely different, which is something I've carried on loving all this time. But it was my way of kind of doing stuff in the environment where I was a bad skateboarder, but I could go and draw it and kind of consume it and own it in that way. And I was always also interested in the idea of not just doing cartoons. I wanted to think about drawing everything. And the idea of actually going out was a really important part of these projects. But after I got in the Royal College, and while I was working on my degree, they said, well, what are you going to put in these environments? They're all very well, but how are they illustration? And what do they communicate to people? So I started thinking up funny cartoon characters to inhabit them. And the first characters I came up with, I didn't really know what I wanted to draw, other than I didn't want to draw people. So I started off by ripping off Javier Mariscal. This was around just after the Barcelona Olympics, for which Mariscal created the mascot. And they're very much in the vein of Mariscal. But I carried on with that idea of populating these urban environments with strange, sort of amorphous characters, and this was my degree show for the Royal College. And what I realised is I went to a course, I studied illustration, and we had to do things like illustrating an imaginary article for the Spectator magazine, but I never really did illustration, what I think of as illustration, of solving problems. I basically just made images that I liked and found a way of justifying what I did in the crits. And I think I've been doing that ever since, really. I've been lucky enough that ever since I left college, I've always been asked to be James Jarvis rather than to solve a problem in the manner of someone like George Hardy, who I think is probably the best illustrator that's ever come out of the UK, as a pure illustrator. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, because it means that you're always asked to be yourself, which is quite nice, but at the same time, it means people expect things to always look a very particular way because they're buying the look of you rather than the content. And this is the sort of one of the very earliest mainstream commissioned illustrations that I did. I did a lot of work for a skateboard shop in London called Slam City Skates, and that was the kind of first published work I did. And that got picked up by The Face magazine, and the art directors at The Face, Stuart Spalding and Lee Swillingham, commissioned me to do quite a lot of work for them for a couple of years. And those were the first jobs that kind of got me outside of the sort of subcultural world of skateboarding. And this illustration's quite significant because at the time I think my work was very referential. It was all about the world I lived in and the things I aspired to own and experience. So it's got references to millions of things that I was into. There's skateboard videos, there's Richard Scarry, there's MC5 posters, there's pictures of Phil Spector and Brian Wilson on the wall, there's Clark's pasty shoes. It was actually an illustration about programming video games in your bedroom, but I basically really did a self-portrait of myself. Although I never had video games, I've never really cared about video games. I kind of resented putting in the video games, but obviously if I hadn't put them in, it wouldn't have been an illustration. And I did a lot of work around that time that was all referential, that had kind of objects that we would recognise. And then after a few years, I started to think, I don't know if I like this philosophically. I don't know if I want to just draw stuff that we consume. I'd rather think about reality, sort of step back from it a little bit. And I started to kind of think about the idea of creating a very specific reality for my characters that was completely made up and didn't have any direct reference to us and our world. And the first time I did this in a sensible, sort of intellectually sustained way was when I did this exhibition in Japan in 1999 or 2000. Because I'd been associated with a streetwear clothing brand called Silas that was very big in Japan, I got asked to have an exhibition at Parco department store, which is quite a prestigious place to exhibit. Basquiat and Warhol and people who had shows there. And I didn't really, I'd just been working in my bedroom at home. I had no sense of what all this meant, but I thought, oh, that would be cool, do an exhibition in Japan. I'd made a couple of toys, which I knew people liked, but I'd never really done a kind of art show. So I created this comic, which sort of, it's very Bauhaus inspired. It's all about a kind of very minimal world controlled by the state. It's kind of Lord of the Rings meets, Joseph Muller-Brockman meets somebody from the Bauhaus whose name escapes me. Johannes Itten, I don't know. And it was a really nice opportunity to try and kind of marshal my thoughts and really think properly about a world. At the time, I really like it as an object now, this comic book, and I think it's quite funny and quite weird, but I cannot bear the way it's drawn because I was very involved in making imagery on the computer, and my work was partly because of getting into making toys and making a lot of technical drawings to give to the model makers. Everything got filtered through the computer and was very processed and got quite frustrating after a bit. It's got an appendix. Not many comics have appendices. So that was my first sort of opportunity to sort of be James Jarvis the artist rather than James Jarvis the illustrator, and I quite liked it. And what I liked was that idea of making projects that I kind of drove myself rather than solving briefs. Setting the brief myself rather than answering other people's. And the reason I kind of was able to carry on with that independent way of working was basically because of getting involved in making toys. I never planned to design these little toys. It was pure circumstance that we were asked by the Japanese distributor of Silas whether we wanted to make a toy. And we said, oh yeah, why not? That'll be fun. And then it kind of snowballed into what I did. It became what I did for a while, and it was never my dream was always just to draw and make a living from drawing things. But what it did give me was the ability to be completely independent of external commissions. So the first toys we made for Silas became popular. We decided to start a company called Amos to kind of make toys that were separate from a fashion company. And basically for 10 years we did Amos. We started off making toys, but Amos ended up becoming way more than just a toy company and way more than just me. It was me in partnership with my friend Russell, who worked as a kind of editor, I guess. And we ended up doing things like curating a music festival with ATP which we did a couple of years ago. We've designed a mini golf hole. We've done graphics and we've done T-shirts, and we also made these toys. And that was a really amazing thing because we weren't waiting for the phone to ring. We were saying, what project can we do? What would we like to do? And then how can we make that work? And the discipline of producing things and making things happen yourself was really quite inspiring. And I think it mainly came from Russell, who had a kind of background in DIY punk rock scene of the kind of mid-70s, late 70s. And he had that spirit of always doing something yourself rather than waiting for somebody else to do it for you. And Amos was a kind of done in the spirit of that. Unfortunately, letting down his punk rock spirit, because Amos was seen as being quite cool and attractive, I ended up getting asked to do things by ad agencies, and so I kind of ended up selling a lot of the imagery that I came up with to people like Coca-Cola and to a lesser extent Nike, because I think the project I did with Nike I did very much on my own terms. But we started off with Amos making toys, and we sort of realised after a bit that we weren't getting a bigger audience with the toys. It was the same 6,000 or 7,000 people around the world buying them. And we sort of thought after a bit, how many more toys can we make if the same people are always buying them? You know, they're just going to not have any room for anything else. And they never take them out of their boxes anyway. So we sort of thought, let's do some other things. So we started to license graphics and make T-shirts as well, and homeware. And these are some of the sort of graphic sheets that we'd send out to our licensors. And I'm just going to show a few of the graphics because I think they're interesting, because they're a kind of transitional thing between what I was doing in that illustration for the face, where I was very directly talking about objects in our world, to the stuff for Amos, which I think we made in the spirit of a lot of kind of late 80s, early 90s skateboard graphics, which was a really vibrant time in skateboarding for making quite, groundbreaking, sort of reappropriating imagery, reappropriating company logos and things in quite a subversive way. And we were both very into that period. There was a company called World Industries, which, if you ever want to research skateboard graphics, that's the sort of period to look at. It's kind of early to mid 90s World Industry graphics, which were really inspiring. And I think we had a bit of that going on with the Amos graphics, but we didn't want to be direct in the way that those early illustrations were. So this is an homage to George Hardy's Pink Floyd record sleeve. It's based on a poster from May 1968 with our character Yod. I feel kind of guilty because obviously these images, the beautiful thing about them is not only are they fantastic bits of graphics, but they're incredibly meaningful. And if I'm sort of hard on myself, I would say it's pretty disgusting that I'm just taking that imagery and kind of stripping of its meaning and using it to stick on a T-shirt. But I obviously wasn't hard enough on myself that I decided not to do it altogether. It kind of went with this character Yod, which was a kind of situationist cartoon character, that it would appropriate that kind of imagery. This is based on the cover of an iconic hardcore record, Minor Threat. That's our King Ken toy as Aladdin Sane. That's the Velvet Underground. That's a very early Kraftwerk LP. That's my Alfred Bestel. Unfortunately, that wasn't a very popular graphic because Rupert the Bear isn't cool. I've no idea why he isn't, because he's one of the best cartoon characters we've ever come up with in the British Isles. But there you go. That's Vitruvian Man. I'm going to have a very short digression into the London Olympics. I wasn't going to talk about it, but then I saw this slide, and I was talking to Lance earlier. I was on the shortlist to design the mascot for London 2012. I was down to the last three. And this was the character I was trying to sell to them. And in the end, we pitched this one, and I got to the next stage and we changed it completely. But then I made a film which Nike paid for, an animation, just as the last round of sort of choosing was going on. And because Adidas were the big title sponsors of the Olympics, they basically said, well, we can't have him because he's too closely associated with Nike. So I kind of got booted off. So I missed my chance to be the kind of Mariscal. Well, I got quite close. But because I don't like to waste anything, we decided to use it for an Amos graphic. And I actually think this would have been really amazing. It would have looked, much better than those weird one-eyed freaky things that frighten children that, my daughter got a postcard from one of them at her school. It was really scary to try and get them to buy into it. This is an homage to a 60s psych record. You can probably tell which that one is. That's two Elvises. And that's the Pal Peralta graphic for the Ripper. Because I think our market for Amos, we realised, was lots of people probably at the time in their kind of mid-30s who'd grown up with skateboarding and liked stuff that was all to do with their childhood. So they all liked this one. That's my Bauhaus homage. That was on one of our poor-selling graphics, which is a shame because I really like it, but it didn't have potato heads on it. And Amos became very closely associated with this sort of pear potato-shaped head. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Amos and how, because we decided to stop Amos at the end of this year because we were bored of it. And also because we felt it had kind of reached its span of what we could do within that context of having a company like that. And this is the last sort of project that we did, which we did this year, and it's stopping at the end of this year to free me not to work with potato heads ever again. But I'd come up with a new character, which we didn't really know what it was, but it was a kind of very inoffensive potato head on legs without the subversive situationist edge that Yod had. And we started calling it the generic character. I think we made this t-shirt graphic, which is we made a few graphics using this character, and we weren't really sure what to do with it. And Russell didn't really like it because he felt it was too bland. And then, this is the mini golf hole. We used it to design this mini golf hole, which is one of those, this is the kind of fantastic thing you get to do if you've got a company that kind of doesn't do anything. No one really knows what it is. I still don't know what Amos was. It was just a vehicle for me and Russell to do weird things together. But we were asked to design a mini golf hole for a trade show in Berlin. So we made this, and I was quite pleased because I came up with the whole idea. You hit it up the ramp, and if it goes through either of the side holes, it comes back out, because you can see there's a little kind of joined loop. And if it goes in the middle, it comes out the other end into his bum. I never actually saw it, but it just sounds really good if you say we had a company that did t-shirts, toys, mini golf, and curated music festivals. It's quite fun. But yeah, we didn't really know what to do with generic character, but we decided that we were going to stop Amos after 10 years because we felt like we couldn't make any more toys. We didn't want to make t-shirt graphics anymore. We wanted to kind of stop Amos while it was on top, I guess. And both Russell and I really loved this film, Repo Man, which anyone over a certain age probably knows. It's absolutely one of the best films ever, along with Spinal Tap and Conan. And Le Samurai, I think it's in definitely my top 5 films of all time. But it had all the packaging in the supermarket was this generic packaging. And I've no idea, I've never seen it in America. I've never idea if this is a real thing or not. Lance might have seen it, but I don't know whether you can really go to a supermarket and everything says beer, food, paper towels. There's no branding at all. But we thought, well, let's do something with this generic character and really make a statement about kind of what Amos started off with, these in-crowd toys that referenced pop culture, punks and bikers and heavy metal dudes. And it seemed like the journey of Amos was kind of me trying to become more and more minimal. And we thought, well, let's see how minimal we can be with our cartoon character. So we made this Amos generic character brand, which the idea was that the character meant absolutely nothing. And we had an exhibition in Tokyo where the exhibition was all the products that we made with the character on. We also made a little book, an alphabet book, And we thought, let's do a kind of homage to Anthony Gormley's Field, and instead of people just buying the toys and keeping them in boxes, let's put every single toy we make out on the floor of the gallery so you can see them all. So there's 500 toys there. Was it 300? I can't remember what the edition was, but anyway. No, all the toys that we had for sale in Japan, I think it's 300. So it's kind of very bland. So we made a book, which again, we thought, what's the most generic book we could make? And we thought a kind of kids' alphabet book. But Russell wouldn't let me, I wasn't allowed to make it because I've got small children. I didn't want to make it too naughty, but because I'm the kind of sensible, well, not sensible, I'm kind of stupid as well, but I'm the most politically correct out of the two of us. So it's just a kind of absurd alphabet. I wanted to say smash the system, and he was like, no, we've got to say fuck. So now I can't show it to my kids. So along the kind of products, this was a postcard set, so you could have a set of stickers. And unfortunately, the kind of mentality of people buying Amos stuff was that no one would ever actually use this. They just keep it in a box with all the other Amos stuff they bought, which seems a shame, because I quite like the idea of people actually sending this to people. And what we thought, while we were working on this, we actually got asked if we'd do a kind of promotional job for Glasso mineral water in Tokyo. And we thought, well, let's just use the generic character, because it kind of underlines the genericness of this character. And it was one of those vaguely excruciating jobs, because they said, we want to do something for the London Olympics. Can we have I forgot what they're called. What are they called, the guys with the busbies? Horse guard. Which is no, it's not a beefeater. Beefeaters have the kind of flat hats, and they live at the Tower of London. I think it is a horse guard. Anyway, it just seemed really cheesy. But then we sort of thought, well, they're paying us, and we won't make any money out of selling tote bags and rude postcards, but we'll get some money from Glasso mineral water. This is I filmed this on my phone in a shop. This is what they did with it. I've no idea what it's all about. It was just a kind of promotion going on in the streets of Tokyo. But it felt quite the sort of journey of Amos going from these weird punk rock toys to this really kind of it was almost a kind of art statement to do this show. And that seemed like a really good bookend way to end it. And that's why we decided to stop, because we just thought, well, what else can we do? It's really bizarre. And as a kind of reaction maybe to all that quite plastic, both in terms of the rendering of it all, very plastic imagery, because it's quite processed, and it's posters and toys and t-shirt graphics. I think towards the end of Amos, I did a book last year which I did for myself, and I wanted to make something that was much more obviously personal. And I made a kind of, I can't remember, 66-page. It got called a graphic novel, but because the pictures weren't divided into little boxes, nobody ever reads it as a sequential book, which is really frustrating. I'm not going to show you every page because it's 66 pages, but it was me trying to go back to what I love most about making work, which is drawing and directness of thought, and doing as little as possible to the drawing. I coloured it in a very simple way, which I felt allowed the line to kind of carry on being a line, and not just filling inside it. And it's basically a story about an artist who sells his soul to the devil, which I didn't realise at the time is obviously another autobiography. So it's interesting how you can see certain of these things are kind of snapshots of me. The other thing that happens, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. He gets commissioned to paint this sort of nameless temple, which is it's a kind of homage. It was all inspired by that Gustave Doré etching of the guy asleep on his drawing board with loads of sort of demonic birds attacking him. Anyway, he gets abducted by his own drawings and put to work, and forced to look after small children, which is obviously me. But I'm going to zip through them all because I don't want you to not buy the book. because it's actually quite entertaining, and I'm really proud of it as a kind of just as an object, because I think it uses drawing in a way that I didn't manage with World of Pain, and it's something that's much more in my thoughts now. And I think it's quite common probably with people who got into the sort of, I left Brighton, I left the Royal College just when the Royal College got Macs for everybody, and I started using a computer, and it was this new thing, and I very much embraced it. And embraced it to the point where I think I forgot about what you can do without a computer. And I think I've been pulling myself back for the last 5-6 years away from the computer and trying to make things as much as possible by hand. And this was I've got 2 jobs where I got paid for, but they decided not to use it, which is really weird, because it kind of never goes out there. And I was really proud of this. It was for a snowboard, for Burton Snowboards, and they wanted a really busy drawing, which I was really pleased, because often they just want a kind of very plastic-looking graphic. And because I had Amos, and Amos used the sort of potato-headed characters, I started drawing this even more generic than the generic character, just a kind of sphere. And I think around this time I was looking at my kids' drawings, and the first thing kids draw is just a round face with eyes and a mouth, and I really loved that. And I thought, kind of, what's the kind of ultimately sort of reductive cartoon character you can do, and it is basically a ball on legs, which obviously I kind of realised after I'd done it that Roger Hargreaves has done that as well. But I've actually got a drawing later that shows that my spheres are very different to Roger Hargreaves and Geneviève Gauclair, who also does them. I'm going to switch over now and talk a little bit about drawing, if I can find my pen, which I've lost now. Here, brilliant. And I've got Sol LeWitt imagery, so just while we switch over, I'll tell you talk about kind of why that Sol LeWitt thing was there. The kind of art I've been looking at as a 40-year-old is very different to what I liked when I was an existential teenager walking around with The Outsider in my back pocket to impress girls. And I got much more into kind of minimalism and conceptual stuff to look at. And I think after doing that big drawing of the spheres that never got used, I really liked that spherical character. And I was also kind of putting that together with these artists that I was looking at like Sol LeWitt and Carl Andre, artists who kind of used process. Sol LeWitt was the one I loved the most, because it was the way you could give instructions about how to make his art. And I really like this idea that you can reduce the character to these elements of a circle, 2 small circles inside with dots in, 2 lines like that. And you can put those together and make a cartoon character, and I kind of like the fact that anybody could do it. And it also goes back to Lego. I've started drawing this comic strip this year, which I'll show a few selections of, and I've done it every day this year. And the idea with it was that I wanted the universe that this character lived in to be kind of incredibly reductive. So there's kind of nothing in it apart from geometric objects. And it's a bit like Lego in the sense that what I loved about Lego in the Lego that I grew up with was there weren't enough bits for you to there weren't enough pieces for you to do the thing, that specifically for the usage that you wanted. You kind of had to improvise. And what I like about this reductive universe is you've got such a limited set of shapes to tell a story with, but you have to see what you can do with those shapes and see if you can still kind of do what you need. Certain things I do allow into the world are skateboards, just because I like them, although I never can decide whether they should be kind of abstracted skateboards that don't really look like real skateboards, or whether they should be kind of realistic. Because if the character's going to do tricks on it, you kind of need to have proper trucks and a tail. I'm trying to think of other things I can draw, but I think what I'll do is actually just switch back and show you what I was doing with this sort of reductive language, and how in the last year or two, the last year, I've tried to bring that language into my commercial work, because it's all very well doing comic strips about philosophy for 20 people to read every day, but it doesn't feed your children. So can we switch back again, and I'll... because at the end of the day, I realise I'm not a fine artist. As much as I like the idea of making personal statements, I feel like the mediums that I really love are mediums of mass communication, and I love comics and animation and T-shirts because there's a kind of directness and a democracy to those mediums that I think is really powerful. So there's some Carl Andre bricks. So over the last 2 years, as well as doing the graphics for Amos, which I stopped doing, basically I did my last set earlier this year, I've been trying to do a kind of personal project, and starting last year I did a project where I made 52 prints. So I made a print every week, like a lino print, a little relief print, in an edition of 7, and I just published it every Saturday and did 52 prints. And it was a really nice thing to have that discipline of making work every day or every week, because often when you're working on long-term projects, you end up not actually doing anything. You know, for a lot of the time you're or not putting anything out there, you're waiting for things to come out. So this is my Spheric Dialogues comic strip, which I've done every day. Some days I've done like 3 or 4 because I felt really inspired. I'm going to see if I can stop it on one that I think is particularly good. I can't stop it like that. So I'll just leave it to play while I talk about it all. The discipline of doing a daily project or a weekly project. And that was a great thing to do, the prints, but at the end of the day, they were kind of decorative objects. And the thing that I love about doing comics and that I loved about doing my book was that it had a kind of, you could really communicate something with a narrative that it's slightly more difficult to communicate in just a one-off image. And I'd never done a daily comic strip, but I grew up with Steve Bell in The Guardian, and I loved that. I just love the idea of the discipline of it, of doing something every single day. So I've been doing that every day this year. And I sort of promote it via Twitter. And my proudest fact about it all is that one of my followers is a professor of philosophy at Warwick University, and if he retweets one of my cartoons, I feel like I've solved some kind of philosophical conundrum in my drawing. But then if I don't get retweeted by Guy Longworth, I feel like I've failed. And I hadn't had a retweet for about 2 weeks, and I was really thinking I've lost my edge. But then I got one yesterday. But actually my cartoon yesterday was about skateboarding, so I think sometimes I'm getting too bogged down in the reading philosophy and trying to directly quote people. Oh, that was quite a good one. Where's my New Yorker one? That was actually quite a easy one to understand, because it doesn't have any ridiculous name dropping of negation or all these other things that I've been reading about. Anyway, you can read them all online at sphericdialogues.wordpress.com, and if I can get 200 more people reading it every day, I'll be really pleased. But I'm really doing that for myself, and partly for the discipline of working on something every day, because if you're doing a project that's going to come out in 6 months' time, nobody's going to see it until then. Partly as a way of kind of improving myself and putting some depth into my work, which I guess because I came out of associations with skateboarding and youth culture, and I'm 42 and I'm interested in lots of things. I still love skateboarding and youth culture. I just don't like young people. I'm interested in other things, and I'd like my work to be able to be about those things as well. Anyway, I was talking about those drawings and that language that I developed, and because I think when you saw that first very elaborate drawing that had lots of kind of cross-hatching in it, the spheres, it was a language that kind of referred back to, Albrecht Dürer, and things like cross-hatching to me are almost meaningless marks. If you're going to make a really honestly pure drawing, you shouldn't have any cross-hatching in it. So I started wanting to make drawings that were just line, and then use colour when you needed to kind of help that line be more or less true. And this was the first project that I did which kind of used that. Sorry about the cross-hatching on that ball. That was a massive cop-out. I got asked to do an ident for MTV at the end of last year. And I worked with a brilliant animator called Richard Kenworthy. I made a film about running with him, which I didn't show because it's too long. But you can look at it online. It's called Onwards, if you haven't seen it. But this was, I always wanted to work with Kenny again, and we got this opportunity to do an ident for MTV. And we came up with this idea that we wanted something, it was about rhythm, and we had this idea that if we wanted to make it quite a conceptual ident, and to be more than just pretty images. So those are the working drawings I did, and these are the little animations. And basically, it's a set of different cut downs to different, of different lengths, where a character does something, and each movement that they do has a sound attached. And we had this idea that you'd only really get what the ident was, what the idea was behind it, if you watched it millions of times, which is what you end up doing with an ident. Unfortunately, that kind of thing is wasted on MTV because all they want to sell is programs about, pregnant 12-year-olds in Whitley Bay. But, which was why this ident that I did that I'm showing you now actually never got used, because once they tested it, they decided that the kids didn't like it. But I actually think it's quite brilliant. Not, to blow my own trumpet, but I think the idea was actually quite clever. And then this is the sort of full 20-second ident, so it's got all the noises happening at once. And because they're all at a different rate of repeat, each loop, there's one moment in the 20 seconds where all those loops come in sync together and you get the kind of chord. So that was the idea of rhythm. It was too high concept for MTV, but they paid us the full amount of money, which was fantastic. And then they said, but we love the look of it. Will you do another ident for us? And we were like, yeah, all right then. And I thought, well, it's MTV. They didn't want any kind of high concept Carl Andre geometry. Let's just give them skateboarding. And I said, well, I could do one about skateboarding. And they were like, yes, we love skateboarding, because, they still think the kids do love skateboarding. So we made this one instead, which is better, but I still like the other one for its minimality. And this is, if you know about skateboarding, I don't know if there are any skateboarders here, it's got loads of references to it references a very specific section of a skateboarding video from about 1993 of this skateboarder called Jeremy Ray, and he does a line at this high school and then does a flip down a gap. And what I wanted to do was, it's a bit, in a funny way, it's like not so dissimilar from the stuff I was doing ages ago, because I'm putting references to things that in our world, they're just much, much more oblique. So that the actual camera movement is exactly the same as in this skateboard video. But you'd have to be really into skateboarding in 1993, which is, there are a few people who are into to sort of pick up on where it comes from. And I like the idea that it's an enjoyable clip, but at the same time, if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find that it relates to things in a slightly more complex way. And these are the drawings I gave to Kenny. And he did a really insane way of making the animation, where he basically built it all in 3D in CGI with little balls, and then printed out the balls and used them to rotoscope, which is why it's got really perfect kind of sense of space in it, and yet it's all completely handmade. And it's something I really like that he did it in that way, because I think it's something that we both probably share, in that I'm not against doing things digitally at all. And I think the sort of democracy of being able to publish things over the internet is a really amazing thing. This is another job I just did, because I haven't done very much. This year I've been mainly doing spheric dialogues. I haven't done that many jobs apart from the MTV thing. I did this poster for Converse UK's skate team, which again they decided not to use. And it's a kind of ironic, well, it's not even ironic, it's just a set. I like the sort of lore of subcultures, the rules that you have in them. And I kind of did something that kind of took the piss out of all those things. And some of them are more obvious, and some of them are really like stuff for skaters, which I think probably why Converse decided not to use it, because they actually don't massively want it to appeal to skateboarders. This is also, I put this one in because I actually redrew the poster for myself by hand, because I thought, I start thinking, what's the point of making things vectors when anybody could do it? And I just much prefer that directness of hand to, or brain to hand. I don't know what the brain to hand that you get from drawing. But I can see why people kind of like the sort of plasticity. There's something appealing about that. But I really like these handmade drawings. I feel like they're more honest. And it's a kind of a leap, but it's not a leap. But I was just going to talk about social media to the end for the rest of the talk. And I think it's the reason it makes sense in terms of everything else is because I seem to be doing less and less projects per year, especially now we've stopped Amos. And those projects, maybe if they're for Coca-Cola designing some cans, are quite lucrative. But they don't, I only need to do maybe 2 or 3 jobs like that a year. And so to have that dialogue with your audience, which I found that I need to have, and that comes back to that thing of me not being asked to do jobs as a problem solver, but as James Jarvis. I need to kind of maintain that cult of the personality and need to maintain a communication with an audience. And it's very difficult to do that if you've only got 2 or 3 projects coming out every year. And what I've sort of discovered through publishing a comic strip on a blog and then publicising that blog through Twitter and then through Instagram, which in principle, I really dislike Instagram, the idea of putting retro filters on pictures of your trainers that you're wearing that day, or your kids, or your food is really boring. But for an illustrator and someone who works in imagery, it's a brilliant way of sharing what you're doing and what you're thinking about with people in a not too precious way. It's not like putting a comic out there. People don't have to buy it, but they can enjoy it and sort of see how you're thinking. And I think there's something really nice about it. So this is just basically my Instagram. I've only been doing it for about 3 months, but I've got really into it because I can just take a photo of something that's on my desk. I put this in because I try not to do just photographs in it, but I decided I had to tidy my workspace because that's my workspace. Like half-eaten packets of fig rolls and running shorts from a year ago on the floor. So there's not really any story between these other than spheres relating to potato heads. That's actually, I've had this idea that I really want to, and this is what Instagram's interesting for, because it's a way of kind of tentatively putting ideas out there to see what kind of reaction they get. But I have a real urge to reinvent myself all the time. I hate showing you pictures of stuff I did for the face because I can't bear the drawing in them. But I kind of have to because it's the story of my work and it makes sense. But I really like the idea of redrawing everything I've ever done only using the language that I'm using now and the characters. So this is a kind of page from the World of Pain comic, but done with a sphere. There are certain motifs that I'm getting. I can see myself basically disappearing up my own arse because I'm kind of reducing the things I want to draw more and more. Like I'll draw a step ladder, and I'll draw blocks, and I might draw a pyramid. I like drawing cans of paint and skateboards, but I'm not even sure if my spheres should have boots on, you know. They can be in silhouette style. Fire hydrants are kind of, you can get away with because they have a certain resonance, especially in skateboarding culture. This is a reference to a really famous photograph of a skateboarder called Natas Kalpas, who used to do this trick where he'd ollie onto a fire hydrant and spin around. This is another skateboard reference. This is a skate spot in San Francisco called the Hubba Hideout, which has been knocked down. This is a sphere talking to the last cartoon character I came up, which was Caleb, which was my first attempt at doing a regular comic strip, which I did with Russell for Amos. We did a daily comic strip, but we only lasted 140 days, whereas I've so far done 200 and, well, I've got a month to go with the spheric dialogues. That was a response to an image that Cause Instagrammed of a pumpkin he'd done with Snoopy on top. So I did a sphere with a sphere on top. More abstracted trees. That's the New York Public Library. It's also a really iconic skateboard spot, and I like the idea of spheres going there and making kind of kinetic sculpture there. It's almost kind of me trying to be Claes Oldenburg. This is almost like an idea for a real sculpture that I'd like to make of a sphere pushing a large sphere down the New York Public Library. This is a sphere pushing a block up the Clipper Ledge, which is another skate spot in Los Angeles. And then the other day I was drawing an umbrella and I thought, what does an umbrella look like? Which is one of the questions I often ask myself, because there's that idea of, especially as you make a living, as becoming an illustrator or a drawer becomes a job, sometimes you forget how to draw things because you trade off what you've learned already. And I thought, what does an umbrella look like? Because I wanted to do a comic strip about umbrellas. So then I had to go and research umbrellas to kind of find out structurally how they were. Because even if you're going to abstract something, I want it to have some relation to reality. Otherwise, I think it really bugs me when illustrators do electric guitars and they have the tuning knobs coming out of the wrong spot, or like rivets in the wrong place on jeans. This was an instruction on how to draw a sphere. Oh yeah, that's my dirty desk. And then I went all graphic thought facility and started piling all my work in little piles on the spare desk. And then you'll see the tidy one. I can't remember who said that. It's probably Wittgenstein or someone. But often I like these images more than any of my work. There's something about the simplicity of them. That's my desk as tidy as it gets. And then I finished the fig roll as a reward when I'd finished it. That was an Instagram in-joke about people taking pictures of their shoes. That's my children playing with Play-Doh, which I think posting pictures of your kids on Instagram is evil, but I actually deleted this from the feed because I thought it's wrong, but I started making spheres out of Play-Doh. And then it's a sphere smashing, it's focusing is the technical term, focusing its skateboard. There's a sphere playing with Brio, drawn on my son's Etch-a-Sketch. There's my generic food Instagram moment. And then I was thinking, I wish I could get paid just to post my images on Instagram, because my favourite thing to do is just to draw things and then show them to people. I don't even care about showing them, but it makes me feel better for spending the time doing the drawing. But this also is a reference to an advert for this skateboard company called Blind from about 1988, which Jason Lee, you probably know Jason Lee, the actor. Before he was an actor, he was a pro skateboarder. Before he became a Scientologist weirdo and acted in Alvin and the Chipmunks movies. I had to get my friend Malcolm's address, so I asked him via Instagram. This is copied out of one of my daughter's reading books. It's It's by this amazing illustrator called Alex Brichter, who I'm obsessed with. He's my favourite illustrator at the moment, and he draws the reading books for primary school children. That's a skateboard graphic homage. That's spheres giving each other a man hug. You know, the kind of hugs where you don't actually touch because your hands are in between, to show how manly you are. That's Matt Hensley ollieing a car, Matt Hensley graphic. That was me taking the piss out of Anthony Burrell, who I really like, but those bloody work hard and be nice to people posters really get on my tits. So I did that. Skateboarding, Minor Threat. That's a kind of Instagram microcosm. That was after watching a documentary about entropy. I really like puns. So it's Soren Kierkegaard. It's a really tenuous pun. Carl Andre. Black Sabbath. I didn't get into music, but music's a really big thing. That's a Claes Oldenburg drawing. And what I like about Instagram is it kind of shows how drawing is part of the fabric of me, in a way that making toys or T-shirts, that's kind of what I do to use my drawings. But drawings are something I just do instinctively and do without thinking. Actually, I make them without thinking, but then I start looking at them and thinking about the kind of drawings I made and what I could do to improve it, I guess, which is why I got into this sort of more minimal line. This was a big drawing event for children in our local park, where they give the kids loads of chalk. That's some instruction to the roughneck youth of South London about littering. That's my daughter copying my sphere. That was at the Museum of London. I don't know if I grew up in London, so there was a guy who used to walk up and down Oxford Street handing out these mad leaflets about how you shouldn't eat protein. And when he died, his family gave all his billboards and his leaflets to the Museum of London. Ping pong. This is a kind of self-referential joke about the spheres dealing with my other cartoon characters. This is the kind of thing where you have your real truck and your abstracted truck, and which is more true, which is more honest. I mean, I feel like the abstracted truck is more honest, but, you know. Sometimes I have to draw dinosaurs because my children get bored of spheres. Pushchairs. If I said, go and draw a pushchair now, you'd all mess up. I mean, you wouldn't, because you've got my fantastic pushchair. They're really hard to draw, pushchairs. You think you know what they look like, and then you don't. I thought that was quite a good visual joke. Bromptons. I had to stop running. I'll just go into this just for Mike O'Shaughnessy's benefit, so I can have a rant about cyclists. I used to race bicycles, then I discovered that I was much better at running, got really good at running, had to stop because I was injured. Started riding my bike again, and then bloody Bradley Wiggins wins the Tour de France. And because I'm a contrarian and have to do the opposite of everybody else, I sort of started thinking, do I really want to go out and with my Lycra and record all my rides on Strava competitively against all the other middle-aged men in Lycra? And seriously, if you go around Richmond Park on a weekday morning, there's loads of people from graphic design students from the Royal College who've all bought carbon fibre bikes going for a training ride before they go to their studio. And it's excruciating. So at the moment, I'm kind of rejecting my road bikes and I'm just riding a Brompton. This was me breaking down spheres into how many marks it takes to draw a sphere on a skateboard. And a sphere in a baseball hat. That's, you see the Mr. Men, they're totally different. I'm not ripping Roger Hargreaves off. A sphere chopping down a tree. My daughter goes to judo. I was wondering whether spheres could do judo, whether they could actually get a grip because of their rotund bodies, but they could. Sphere on a dinosaur. I'm not sure if that's a kind of, like when you meet, whether that would work in a kind of interconnected universes or not. That's a water tower near my sister-in-law's in Kent. I thought I'll get that in a drawing. That's my homage to Maurizio Catalan. I don't know if anyone knows he's a really brilliant Italian sculptor who had a really good retrospective at the Guggenheim, which was while I was in New York. Not that I go to New York all the time, I just happened to go there and see a really good abstracted tree and a Maurizio Catalan exhibition. I was thinking about clothes, and I was thinking spheres are boring because what can they wear? Because they've got no bodies. But then I thought, well, they can wear hats. I made so I've still got skills, even though I only draw spheres. I can make fondant seals for my daughter's birthday. Which I feel that's important, that if you can't impress the children with your work, then you're not trying hard enough. And those will have thank you cards. They're all seals. There's a depressed sphere standing on another piece of wooden railway. And sometimes I'll use these ideas for my comic strip. That's Dr. Johnson refuting, I've forgotten whether it's Hume, who basically said that everything is a dream and nothing is real. And Dr. Johnson, when he heard this, kicked a rock on the floor and said, "I refute it thus." I thought that was a really brilliant quote. I really love reading philosophy, and I don't understand it all. I probably don't understand any of it, but I love the idea of thinking about reality. And I guess it's Lego, isn't it? It's breaking down things into these constituent parts and making sense of them all. But sometimes Dr. Johnson's "I refute it thus" just kind of says more about anything than all the other really hardcore dudes. Copying trucks and diggers to impress the kids again. That was, oh no, I didn't show that one. That's a kind of redrawing of a drawing I did for the face. I've still had this idea that one day what I'll do is I'll wipe out everything I ever did and redo everything using spheres, and that will be everything I've done. I'll burn everything else. But then obviously I'll have to burn all the spheres when I get sick of them and I reinvent myself again. I don't know what, I was talking to the designer Jeff McFettridge, and he was saying he stopped caring about trying to make his work kind of fit together. The work that draws on, almost is more of an artist's, a personal statement, and the work that's more obviously just graphic design or traditional graphic design. He just doesn't care. He just lets it sort itself out. And I find that very difficult. I have this urge for everything to kind of click together, and it bugs me when I have to maybe put something in a drawing that I don't want to because I need to for a job. It grates with me, and I think this is why I like this idea of one character that can do everything, because it helps to unify everything you do. That's a reference to a really classic Judge Dredd image, only Judge Dredd's standing on the words say crime, and he's holding a massive gun, but my guy's standing on existence. Oh, and that's the end. Any questions? So please ask me to make sense of all that babbling. Thank you.